I'm very excited to share my second presidential library visit on my quest to visit all of them. As we walked into the HarrySTruman Presidential Library and Museum in Independence, Missouri, I expected to learn about America's 33rd president. What I didn't expect was to leave with a much deeper appreciation for the weight of presidential leadership and how one ordinary man from Missouri found himself making some of the most consequential decisions in world history. And I did love the price, of it only being $12 per person. The museum does an excellent job of telling Harry's story chronologically, beginning long before he entered the White House. Visitors are introduced to Harry's humble beginnings in rural Missouri, where he grew up on a farm and developed the work ethic and straightforward personality that would define his life. Through photographs, personal belongings, and family artifacts, I learned about his close-knit family, his love of reading, and the fact that despite never attending college, he educated himself extensively through books. One of the first things that stood out to me was how ordinary Harry's early life really was. He worked on the family farm, served in World War I, owned a failed haberdashery business, and gradually entered politics through local government before eventually serving in the U.S. Senate. Unlike many presidents who seemed destined for greatness from an early age, Harry's path was anything but predictable. The World War I exhibits were particularly interesting. They explained Harry's service as a captain in the field artillery and how commanding Battery D transformed him into a confident leader. The museum highlights stories of the men who served under him and the lifelong friendships he maintained with many of his fellow veterans. It became clear that military service shaped his leadership style, teaching him responsibility, decisiveness, and loyalty. The museum then follows Harry's rise through Missouri politics before detailing his election to the Senate. One exhibit explains his work leading what became known as the Truman Committee during World War II. The committee investigated waste, fraud, and inefficiency in wartime defense contracts, ultimately saving the federal government billions of dollars while ensuring that American troops received better equipment. This success dramatically raised Harry's national profile and helped position him as Franklin D. Roosevelt's running mate in the 1944 presidential election. One of the most dramatic moments in the museum focuses on April 12, 1945, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt suddenly died. Harry had served as vice president for only 82 days and had been excluded from many of Roosevelt's most closely guarded wartime decisions. He and FDR had only met twice during FDR's presidency. That seems pretty crazy today. Harry was suddenly sworn in as president while World War II was still raging across Europe and the Pacific. Standing in this gallery, I couldn't help but imagine the overwhelming responsibility Harry faced and honestly wouldn't want it for myself. Within hours of taking office, he inherited not only the presidency, but also the burden of finishing the largest war in human history. The World War II section is one of the museum's most powerful exhibits. It explains the closing months of the war and the difficult choices Harry confronted. The exhibits present the development of the atomic bomb through the Manhattan Project and explore Harry's decision to authorize its use against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Rather than telling visitors what to think, the museum presents military estimates, casualty projections, historical documents, and differing viewpoints, allowing everyone to examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions. Reading these documents was sobering. The museum effectively demonstrates that Truman's decision remains one of the most debated in American history. Seeing original letters, official memoranda, and first-hand accounts adds a level of gravity that simply reading about the event in a textbook cannot provide. Another memorable section explores the beginning of the Cold War, something I kind of lived through when I was little. Remember duck and cover? The exhibits explain the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and the Berlin Airlift, all of which became foundational policies in containing the spread of communism. The Berlin Airlift exhibit was especially impressive. Through photographs, maps, and personal stories, it illustrates how the U.S. and its allies supplied an entire city by air after the Soviet Union blocked access to West Berlin. It serves as a reminder that not every Cold War victory was won through military force. Sometimes determination, logistics, and diplomacy proved just as important. The museum also examines the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, one of Truman's lasting international achievements. One gallery focuses on the recognition of the new state of Israel in 1948. I learned that the president recognized Israel only minutes after its declaration of independence, despite considerable debate within his administration. The exhibit includes correspondence, historical documents, and explanations of why this decision continues to have global significance today. It left me wondering, what if he hadn't recognized Israel? How different would our world be today? Domestic issues receive equal attention throughout the museum. Visitors learn about his efforts to expand civil rights, including his landmark decision to desegregate the U.S. military through Executive Order 9981. This action represented a major step towards racial equality years before the broader civil rights movement gained momentum. The museum doesn't avoid his political challenges either, which I greatly respect and appreciate. His surprise victory in the 1948 presidential election is one of the most entertaining sections. Campaign memorabilia, posters, and the famous Dewey Defeats Truman newspaper headline tell the story of one of the greatest upsets in American political history. Another fascinating exhibit explores everyday life inside the White House during Truman's presidency. Visitors learn that the White House itself had become structurally unsafe, requiring extensive reconstruction, while the Truman family temporarily lived across the street in Blair House. Photographs and architectural displays explain just how close this historic building came to catastrophic failure. Throughout the museum, numerous personal artifacts help humanize Truman. His eyeglasses, clothing, military items, handwritten letters, speeches, and gifts from foreign leaders remind visitors that behind every historic decision stood a real person facing extraordinary circumstances. It's shocking today to see how many letters he wrote to Bess. She, on the other hand, burned a lot of her letters. Bess was an intensely private person who believed her personal affairs and thoughts were her own. One display I particularly enjoyed focuses on Truman's famous desk sign reading "The buck stops here." The phrase perfectly summarizes his philosophy of leadership. Ultimate responsibility belongs with the person making the final decision. It is a simple message that continues to resonate in government, business, and everyday life. The museum also does an excellent job of presenting Bess Truman and Margaret Truman as more than supporting characters. Visitors learn about Bess's preference for privacy and Margaret's successful singing and later writing career. Their stories help paint a fuller picture of the Truman family and their life during and after the presidency. One of the highlights of any visit is walking through the family's final resting place in the peaceful courtyard. Harry, Bess, and Margaret are buried on the library grounds, creating a unique connection between the museum's historical exhibits and the legacy they preserve. Standing at the gravesite provided me a quiet moment to reflect on everything learned throughout the visit. The architecture of the library itself contributes to the experience. Originally dedicated in 1957, it was the first presidential library established under the Presidential Libraries Act and set the model for future presidential libraries across the country. Recent renovations have modernized the exhibits while preserving the building's historic character. One of the standout exhibits was the trio of classic cars displayed in the basement. If you enjoy this kind of automotive history, I also recently covered the Forney Transportation Museum in Denver. Definitely worth checking out after this video. Down in the exhibit space, you'll find two 1941 Chryslers that the Trumans purchased in November of 1940, both finished in matching dove gray. The beautifully restored Windsor sedan belonged to Bess Truman, and she kept it throughout their time in the White House, before later gifting it to a friend. Harry's car was a smaller Royal Club coupe, which he eventually passed on to his sister after he was finished with it. The third vehicle on display is the 1950 Lincoln Cosmopolitan limousine. At nearly 20 feet long with seating for 7 passengers, it was purpose-built for government use, reflecting the growing need for larger, more formal official transportation in the mid-20s. Also in the basement were 2 exhibits that stepped outside Harry Truman's personal story while still connecting to Truman and Kansas City history. The first, America at 250, The Story of Us, looks at how the United States has evolved over 250 years. Through rare documents, artifacts, and interactive timelines, it follows the nation's journey from its founding ideals of freedom, equality, and self-government through periods of war, social change, and progress. The exhibit explores how these ideals have been challenged, defended, and redefined by each generation. Among the displays is a scale model of the Independence, the VC-118 military transport aircraft that served as President Truman's official airplane. Also on display is the striking red gown worn by Hillary Clinton during the 1993 presidential inaugural gala celebrating Bill Clinton's first inauguration, offering a connection to another chapter of presidential history. The other temporary exhibit is focused on sports, especially soccer. It's called United We Play, Kicking It with the Trumans. Margaret once said, "I'm not athletic, just like my father," but Harry was a sports lover. This exhibit focuses on the role of sports in American life and how games, especially baseball, football, and soccer, have helped bring communities together. It also highlights Kansas City's deep sports history. As a Buffalo Bills fan, I couldn't connect, but I could appreciate it. The exhibit shows how sports have long served as a unifying force across generations and backgrounds. on display during the 2026 exhibition season. It also ties into the excitement of the FIFA World Cup that came to Kansas City, making it both historically rooted and very current. After exploring the library's special exhibits, I continued into the permanent museum, where the story shifts from national history to Harry Truman's personal involvement in creating the Presidential Library itself. During the construction and early development of the library, Truman didn't just step away from the project, he stayed closely involved in its creation and day-to-day activity. While the museum building was being completed, he used a temporary office space on site where he would work, meet with staff, and continued engaging with visitors and researchers connected to his presidential papers. You can see his office through glass, but it's pretty dark, so it didn't show up well for filming. The space he worked from became an extension of his post-presidential life, blending his personal papers, public education efforts, and hands-on involvement in shaping how his administration would be remembered. Another office you won't want to miss is the recreation of Truman's Oval Office. It looks noticeably different from the Oval Office we know today. Carefully reconstructed to reflect its appearance in the late 1940s and early 50s, it features period-accurate furnishings, decor, and personal touches that offer a glimpse into Truman's working environment and leadership style. The room features details like portraits, books, and a green-tone design scheme that reflects his personal tastes. It's staged to feel active and lived in, emphasizing that Harry was known for long hours, direct communication, and hands-on leadership. Perhaps the biggest lesson I took away was that Harry Truman never sought fame or prestige. Time and again, the exhibits emphasized that he viewed public office as a responsibility rather than a privilege. Whether making difficult wartime decisions, confronting Soviet expansion, supporting European recovery, or advancing civil rights, Truman consistently demonstrated a willingness to accept accountability for his choices. By the time I finished touring the museum, I realized this wasn't simply a history museum dedicated to one president. It is a museum about leadership under pressure. Every gallery reminds visitors that presidents don't make decisions with the benefit of hindsight. They must evaluate incomplete information, weigh competing advice, and make choices that may affect millions of lives. Leaving the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library Museum, I came away with a greater understanding of both the man and the era he helped shape. The exhibits are thoughtfully organized, historically balanced, and filled with authentic artifacts that bring history to life. Whether you're interested in World War II, the Cold War, American politics, civil rights, or presidential history, the museum offers something meaningful to discover. One unexpected highlight of our visit was something we never imagined we would experience in person. On the day we toured the museum, 36 people from 17 different countries took the oath of allegiance and became naturalized U.S. citizens. We were invited to attend the ceremony and witness this milestone firsthand. It was a truly moving experience and a memorable addition to our visit. Oh, and if you are on a quest to visit all the presidential libraries and museums in the U.S., get a passport from the merchandise store and make sure to get your stamp at every one you visit. I can't wait to get every stamp. Yeah, I know, I'm a nerd. If you have the time, and unfortunately we did not after the addition of attending the Naturalization Ceremony, you're actually in the middle of one of the best presidential history districts in the country. These historic sites include Harry's home, childhood home, courthouse, family landmarks, and historic Independence Square. Most of these stops are within a 5-minute drive, and several are walkable. And, as always, thanks for watching. Now hit that like button for me, and keep an eye out for more Aunt Shazy videos as we travel the country.